Hey guys, Tom Barclay here. Just got back from Spurs training ground after the press conference with Ange Postecoglou and James Maddison, previewing the Europa League semi-final first leg against Bodo Glimt. I'll start with Ange, and I think probably the most interesting part of the presser, actually, one of the comment that he sort of volunteered. It was an answer to one of my questions, but I was mainly asking about the message he'd been sort of giving his players ahead of this massive week, which feels like could be transformative for their season. Speaks to how throughout this campaign, when it's been so difficult in the league, where he's constantly said reminded the players that there can still be a triumphant end to this difficult campaign. What message might be a bit different this week, and that was what I asked him. But in his response, he kind of had a pop at Spurs' critics. At least that's the way I and many others interpreted it. And it's by saying how people are basically kind of diminishing what Spurs could possibly achieve in the Europa League. And he then suggested he'd heard that it had been said that it would be the equivalent of Man United winning the FA Cup if Spurs won the Europa League, and he said, no, it ain't. Not on any planet would it be the same. And what's interesting about that is, I guess what he's having a go at is people like Troy Deeney, Jamie Carragher, maybe other pundits and people in the media, basically warning Tottenham not to make Man United's mistake that they made last summer when Erik ten Hag looked like a dead man walking at Man United, then somehow won the FA Cup against Man City. But instead of doing this sort of cold-hearted but perhaps sensible thing at the time and sack him anyway, they hand him a new contract. But lo and behold, it didn't change things, and he was gone by October anyway. And that's the argument they've made, warning that Spurs would risk doing the same thing based on the league performances if they were to go in the Europa League and not dismiss Ange. And Ange sort of bringing up Man United, sort of volunteering that in the FA Cup, makes me think that's kind of what he's referring to. Maybe you'll think differently, but that's the way I see it. And he also mentioned that people sort of saying that Spurs wouldn't be worthy of the Champions League. I don't know who has suggested that personally, but because I haven't read that one. But I guess that's in reference to how abysmal their league form has been, and whether it's really right they should be playing the Champions League next season. I mean, of course it is. I mean, as bad as their Premier League form has been, those are the rules. And if they can go and win the Europa League, then they deserve to be in the Champions League. It's just that's just how it is. But it was just interesting. It just kind of felt like he was kind of coming out swinging a little bit, which we've kind of seen of late. I mean, kind of continuing this narrative of kind of a them and us scenario where he feels like not so much, I guess, us who go regularly, as he pointed out last week in the press conference when I literally asked him, why do you feel like it's them against us? But he does feel there's a wider narrative with Spurs where people are a bit unfairly critical of the club and perhaps himself. I personally, as I've said many times on here, don't believe that. I don't see it. I've covered Spurs for nearly 3 years now, so maybe it's not long enough to really get a sense of a sort of an inherent, I don't know, bias, but an inherent sort of belittling of Tottenham amongst the footballing world. I just think it's down to results, and if you do well, you get praise, and if you do badly, you get criticised, and that's just where we're at. But I know a lot of you who commented when I talked about that last time think I'm naive and disagree on that point, so feel free to do the same thing again. But until maybe I need to do this job longer and I'll see the same thing, but personally I don't, coming from it from a sort of neutral perspective. But anyway, I found it interesting that Ange brought that up, and he sort of reiterated the need to focus on this great opportunity. It feels a little slightly presumptuous, I suppose, even talking in that way, because first of all they've got to get past Bodo Glimt, who at the same time Ange was very much not taking lightly. He knows from personal experience how good they can be, having lost twice to them with his Celtic side back in 2022. And whilst he is often not one for looking back at previous performances if they're a while ago for relevance for a modern day game, he actually did think there were lessons that can be taken from that particular match, because it's the same manager, a lot of it's the same team, the same style, the same club. In fact, he praised them a few times about for sticking with an identity, which one could see as maybe a slightly pointed comment towards Tottenham and what he said a few weeks ago about how Spurs need to stick with something going forward. But either way, whether it was one of those or just literally just a genuine observation about the consistency that Bodo have shown as a club in recent years, he was praising them for it, and I suppose that does make those performances against his Celtic side relevant to this particular game, since, as I say, lots of the same players, the same manager, and he had this nice quote about how, when he was asked by there's a lot of Norwegian journalists there, and they were kind of trying to make the case for why Spurs may possibly take Bodo lightly, but given it's a town of 50,000, which is obviously a lot less than Spurs' capacity of their own ground. He basically said, look, I'm from the other side of the world. We're in a country where football is the fourth biggest sport, so I don't underestimate anyone. And Bodo are very much there on merit. They've defeated the likes of Lazio, Olympiacos. There's more to it than FC Twente, Porto, beating loads of good teams this season, particularly at home. And so he knows how good they are. He's had first-hand experience of it with his Celtic side. He said with that particular match, because Celtic Park's a pretty intimidating atmosphere, one of the things he noticed was how unfazed Bodo were. I'm pronouncing it wrong, by the way. It should be like Bodo, I think it is, but I'm going to stick with Bodo just in case I've butchered it anymore. How unfazed they were, and they showed that as well at Old Trafford, where I know they lost this season, but they played really well, and obviously in other grounds. They're not going to be fazed by the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, which is something that James Maddison said as well. And he knows what to expect from this Bodo team. What else did he say? Obviously, Son is missing. That's big team news. Not unexpected, let's be honest, after he's missed the last, 4 games with his foot injury. Slightly worrying, really. He said he's in terms of when he'll be back, because it was a bit vague. He said he's hopefully back sooner rather than later. So he didn't really even put a time frame on it. He is training at the moment, but on his own outside. What else did he say? Oh, he was actually, I didn't realise this, but there is a slightly ominous parallel to the last time Tottenham won a European trophy back in 1984 when they won, I guess it would be the UEFA Cup back then. He says, saying that and now worrying he's got the wrong name of the European trophy, showing his lack of knowledge or lack of depth of Spurs knowledge going back. I'm pretty sure it's the UEFA Cup, so please forgive me if I'm wrong on that one. But anyway, I didn't realise that apparently Liverpool won the league that year as well, unsurprisingly, like they have done this time. And the Spurs manager, despite winning the European trophy, did leave the club in the summer. It was Keith Birkinshaw, famously, and whether that would be slightly ominous for Ange, given the stories around and the possibility that he could still go even if they win the competition. Luckily for Ange, he's not superstitious. He made quite a funny joke about socks and how once he was superstitious and changed his socks, then realised, what am I doing if I'm basing this whole performance? If it's all down to my socks, I'm not really much of a coach, am I? Which is definitely the right way to go about things personally when it comes to silly things like that. But this is football. There are loads of players who have funny little superstitions, so it wouldn't be surprising if he did. Anyway, and what else did he say? And finally he was asked about Lucas Bergvall. So obviously they're playing a Scandinavian team in Bodo. They've got their own little Scandinavian success story in Lucas Bergvall, the Swede who came in the summer. He's probably been the biggest or the shiniest ray of light in this gloomy season for Spurs, with his emergence throughout the season, and obviously signed a new contract on Tuesday until 2031. Well deserved, you'd have to say, from Bergvall's performances, the way he's emerged and established himself really as a first team regular. Now when you look at the midfield in these big games under Ange, you just presume he's in it, which is probably the biggest sort of compliment you could give to him about how well he's done this season. But you know, Ange had lots of nice words for Bergvall. He talked about how he worked really, really hard at his game this season. He said, understandably, he struggled at first with the intensity and the tempo. and but that's what they were expecting, given he'd come from the Swedish league. But he's grabbed the opportunity with both hands. Obviously through not through luck, but through circumstances this season with all the injury crisis. I don't think the plan had been to give him as much game time as they did, but his emergence has been, like I say, a silver lining in this difficult season. And that's pretty much it from Ange. On to James Maddison. And let's pick up from Bergvall, actually, because one of my favourite quotes of the day was James comparing Lucas Bergvall to a bee. When he said when he first came to Spurs, he was like a bee in the way he was sort of just everywhere on the pitch, apparently, and just really happy to be part of it. Underlining why there's such a big buzz about Lucas Bergvall, perhaps at the moment. Pun fully intended. Apologies. But he was very, very complimentary in this sort of long answer he gave about Lucas Bergvall, in the way that he's been impressed with how Bergvall, despite establishing himself as a first team regular, he's not been having himself, as Madison put it. He's not been arrogant with it. He's not suddenly thought he's the man. He's made it. He's still willing to listen and learn all the time. And it sounds like Madison's been really keen to impart his footballing wisdom, I guess, from all the experiences that he's had, which include, obviously winning the FA Cup with Leicester, to Bergvall. And he just thinks he's a fantastic talent, and he praised Spurs for getting that contract signed. And it's very easy to batter Tottenham at the moment, and rightly so, to be honest, given how dreadful the league campaign has been. But signing Bergvall and managing to convince him to sign over Barcelona has been a positive. They've backed it up by playing him a lot. I think it's been the right move for him personally. Even if had he gone to Barcelona, perhaps he would be in a Champions League semi-final right now, but he probably wouldn't have played much. Whereas now it's all about opportunity, isn't it? And he's established himself at a team that is competing in a European semi-final. He's going to be starting. So a rare success story for Tottenham this season, you'd say, with Lucas Bergvall. On Madison, what else? He had a lot of other things to say, actually. He's such a good talker. Honestly, he's one of the best interviewees on the football circuit there is going when he wants to be. He was asked, obviously, about Ange and support of the manager. And he's not the first. In fact, every player we've had up for these European games during this time when pressure has really grown on Postecoglou have fallen over themselves, to be honest, to talk about how much they like him as a manager and how much they're supporting him. And obviously they're going to say that, you'll say, when they're put on the spot. The manager's still there, but you do get the sense from Maddison's answer that he genuinely has a lot of affection for Postecoglou. He called him a great man. He said they're 100% all behind him, and he talked about how, obviously there's been a lot of speculation, myself included, all the media talking about Ange's future and how they're trying to block it out, but he still sees, a manager coming in, giving his instructions over, players listening. He sees a lot of positives with Postecoglou, and will continue to be the case for as long as he's here. And the other thing with Maddison, I slightly feel for him this year. I mean, I guess it comes with the territory of being vice-captain, particularly when Son's been injured, but it does feel like he's almost had like a new role to play this season. And I don't mean a sort of positional change. It's the role of having to front up and be the sort of main fronter-upper, if that's a word, of the team when things have been going badly. Whether it be the one who has to speak publicly after games, often on the TV, like for example after the Liverpool game at the weekend, he was the one who had to speak, and he's quite self-aware that fans don't really want to hear him speak, don't really want to hear the players speak when it's going so badly, but he knows somebody has to, so he will do it. But his sort of message today with that, like, words are just words, it's about no, it's time for actions, really, to sort of to back up any of those words, really, that he's been using this season to try and not explain away anything, but apologise. All these words is not empty words, but all these comments after games which just fans aren't even really listening to anymore. But it's not just fronting up in that way. I mean, when you're at matches and you're watching after games, particularly after defeats, particularly away defeats, when there's the section of the sort of hardcore fan base, particularly in Europe, when they're frustrated and they sort of vent their frustrations to the players. It is Maddison who often goes nearest to those fans and goes and talks to them. He's not the only one, but he's consistently the main one doing it when other players haven't as much, to be fair. And at times, to be honest, Ange hasn't as much. And I think he deserves some credit for that. I think fans can appreciate him fronting up in that sense. Even if his performances at times, despite his numbers, may have been due to their own bit of criticism, I think fans can appreciate his honesty and his having to deal with these difficult situations and not hiding, I suppose. But like I said, his message today was about how they wanted to, felt like he wanted to reward the fans for their loyalty this season. What's been a difficult campaign. He feels the hurt of everyone. He understands how difficult it's been, but there's like Ange said, there's a massive opportunity there to win a trophy, and it's not very often that you get. And Madison and Postecoglou said this: no matter how good a team you are, it's quite rare that you're in a European semi-final. It just is, unless you're even if one of the big hitting teams in Europe. It doesn't happen that often, and again, it's just words. You've got to see the actions of how they play on Thursday and next week to back it up. But it does seem like they genuinely want to take this opportunity. And he had a little word about Matisse Tell as well, because Tell's probably going to start on the left, you'd imagine, with Son being absent, and where he's sort of played a lot recently, and he's been quite impressed with how Tell's sort of got to grips with things and is starting to show a bit more of his own confidence this season. So, I mean, just finally, Bodo, obviously, you just only have to look at their results this season, particularly at home, to see what a dangerous opponent they are. Seems like their manager, who's been sort of linked to quite a few big jobs like Leeds and Brighton over the years, is someone who's done a fabulous job. They've done really well in continuing to grow as a club, despite losing their best players, because obviously a team like Bodo are always going to struggle to keep hold of their best players, even if in the last few years, even since they battered Roma 6-1 or played against Arsenal a few years ago or Celtic, they have become one of the sort of bigger paying teams, or if not the biggest paying team in Norway. It's still chalk and cheese compared to the Premier League, for example, or AC Milan, which I remember a few years ago they lost one of their players to them. But what they've done is they seem to have managed to have such a sort of collegiate feel in their squad, such a friendly feel. And we did an interview with the sporting director of the club the other day. I think it's just gone out today, where he was talking about this very thing about players coming back, having seen if the grass is greener abroad, got their big move, hasn't quite worked out, but they want to come back to Bodo because of how much they seem to love and value playing with their mates. Effectively, it seems to be like one of the, if not the friendliest club in Europe, and that is a sort of, that team bond seems to be one of their biggest strengths, and will prove to be a difficult nut to crack, as well as the fact that they seem to have really wised up to if not the dark arts, then being a bit less naive in certain games and adapting their style, and that's been reflected by their results. But what's clear is that the away leg next week, which I'm looking forward to going to Norway for, they've got such a great record on this plastic pitch in cold temperatures, albeit it doesn't feel like it's going to be quite as cold in Bodo as it normally is in the Arctic Circle. Which hopefully will help the Spurs players. That is going to be a major factor in how Tottenham get on getting through this tie, which makes you think they really do need to go and get a good win, or at least a win from the first leg. But I said that last time in the Frankfurt game. They drew, they got through with a really dogged display out in Frankfurt, so maybe it's not as simple as that, and they can pull out performances seemingly from nowhere, particularly defensive performances, but it feels hard to see because of how poorly they're playing in the league. But then again, they did it against Alkmaar in the second leg. They did it against Frankfurt in the second leg. And the first leg, to be fair, they played quite well in that game too. So it seems very possible. Finally, on the team lineup, I don't think it's actually too hard to predict this one. Vicario in goal, Porro, Romero, Van de Ven, Udogie. That seems to be his favourite back four, despite Jed Spencer's good season. Bentancur, Bergvall, Madison seems to be the obvious midfield now. Basumi looks way off it. Gray didn't play very well the other day, got hooked at half time. Sarr seems to be struggling to get into the starting 11 now, so that's very likely. You think Solanke centre forward. I think Tal wide left, and then it's just a question mark over the right side. I would probably think Odegaard, but obviously there's Johnson who could be there. Richarlison's pushing as well the way he's playing, but you think probably more likely off the bench. So that's what I reckon. Let me know, guys, what you think, and I will be doing a post-match video after the game. Let's hope a positive one. Cheers, guys.